So, welcome to a new podcast by Teesside Health Co. I'm Harry, your host, and this is Steve from Stephen Hope Wealth Management. It's not the Stephen Hope, but it's the other Steve that works at Stephen Hope Wealth Management. How are you doing, Steve?
Very well, Harry. How are you?
Good. Yes, great, thank you. Today, in this workshop, we're going to be talking about financial wellbeing, and we're going to be talking about, in particular, pensions. And this is obviously an area of specialty for yourselves. So today, I'm going to be asking Steve a bunch of questions that are specific to pensions, but on the both sides of pensions for the employee and the employer. Steve's going to give us his best knowledge. So, do you want to get started, Steve?
Absolutely, yeah.
Let us know a little bit more about what financial advice is for a start.
Yeah, so financial advice quite often gets misinterpreted. People think that you need to have a lot of money to have a financial advisor, but in our experience, or my experience, I find the opposite to be true. I think everybody should have a financial advisor in some capacity. Basically, what a good financial advisor will do will help you come up with a plan and put that in place, and basically make sure that your money's working as hard as possible for you. So the plan can be as robust as you want. It can just be to make your money work harder. It can be to make sure you've got money to go on holiday every year. It could even be just to make sure your mortgage is on the best rate. Or we can get really detailed. And detailed planning can be pensions, which we're going to talk about today, or even generational wealth, making sure money passes through generations in the most tax efficient manner. So effectively, financial advice can be as detailed and as heavy touch or as light touch as you want. Yeah. What we do tend to find is people have a lot of concerns regarding costs and charges, and what we would always say is we don't charge to sit down with a client. We would never charge a client to sit down and give our general thoughts on someone's kind of current situation. The only time anyone would ever have a charge or a cost is when advice is actually implemented. The client will be well informed before that, and they could even walk away at that stage. So yeah, I think financial advisors have a place in the world, definitely, and I think more people should be using them.
So it's a very safe way of being able to manage your money. It's probably the safest.
Yeah, so it's a very regulated world. We're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Stephen Hope and Stephen Hope Wealth Management, we work with St James's Place, so we're the largest wealth management company in the UK. So we're a FTSE 100 company, we're a recognised brand, and that's good for us because it protects us as financial advisors because we've got the due diligence on our end, but also protects the clients because we've got a big company behind us as well. Yeah.
Amazing. So you're in safe hands with Stephen Hope Wealth Management, and hopefully today we're going to be getting into the depths of pensions and how all that works. So what should we know about financial advising if we haven't already used the service yet?
So the big thing to know really is that it's a people game. I choose what clients I want to work with, and vice versa, clients choose to work with me. Now, an ideal client is someone I work with over a long period of time. We put a plan in place and we revisit that plan, we come back to it to ensure that it's on track. We account for bumps in the road, changes in circumstance, lifestyle, changes in family, health, changes in wealth, promotions and things like that. So I think what people might get or might not expect is that it's not transactional in nature. Yeah. It is a relationship, it's a relationship game. So we like to work with clients from sort of start to end. And I think that's the big thing. It's you've got to get on with your financial advisor. It's not a case of we all have the right qualifications, we all have the right sort of know-how, but it's a people game at the end of it. Yeah.
Completely agree. So I want to dive into pensions.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the first most obvious question.
Of course.
What is a pension?
So a pension is a very tax-efficient vehicle that you can use to save for your retirement, in a nutshell. Now, there are lots of tax-efficient benefits that the government have put in place to make it a credible vehicle and what people want to use to save for their retirement. So, effectively, when you pay money in to a pension, the government gives you tax relief, so that's income tax relief and national insurance relief. And then when the money's invested inside a pension, it's a very tax-efficient environment. So there's no capital gains to pay, which means you don't pay any tax on gains that you make within the pension. It also falls outside your estate, so there's no inheritance tax to pay on a pension. And then to get money out, again, the government give you help because they give you 25% lump sum, which you can take tax-free. And you also get options on how you withdraw your pension, which basically means you have the option on how you tax-efficiently take that money out. So effectively, it's a really tax-efficient vehicle to save for your retirement, however that looks. Okay. Now, auto-enrolment was brought in a few years back by the government to help people save for retirement. And what it did was it brought in an obligation by employees that they now have to contribute to a pension as well. Okay, so the new rules are, as a minimum, an employee contributes 5% of their pension, an employer contributes 3% of their pension. That's not the same on all employees, some do more as a kind of staff reward, but that's the minimum that they need to pay. Okay, and that comes off your gross salary in most cases, which means that you get tax relief at the highest rate. Okay, now that's effectively what a pension is. So the money goes in by you and your employer, and then it's invested for you. So your pension company, whoever that is, Legal & General, Nest, Aviva, St James's Place, they will then look after that pension for you by investing it and trying to make that money grow. So at a point in time in the future when you need that money, obviously it's grown in size and it's kept pace with inflation, and then it's there available to help fund your lifestyle. And that's effectively what it is.
Okay. So are there more than one type of pension?
So yes, there are technically more than one type. There are quite a few different types of pensions, but the main one people will come across is their employer pensions. So that's obviously set up by the company and then paid for by the employer. The other side of pensions is state benefits or state pension, which people get access to at currently 66, but that's increasing to 68 soon. Basically, that's a bit of a backstop. So that's sort of there is a catch-all to make sure that effectively people have their basic requirements met by the pension. Okay, so state pension is a requirement. It is built up by your national insurance contributions. Okay, and you need to have a minimum number of years contributions into your national insurance to make sure you get full state entitlement to your state benefits. Now, one thing I recommend, and if anyone's listening to this video today, you can and should really go into the government gateway to check to see what you've contributed over your lifetime to this point. Because you basically, if you have got missing years, you can contribute back to them as a top up. But also it's good to know if you're on track. So the basic state entitlement to pension at the moment is about £10,600. That should increase as we go forward. People might have heard of the triple lock. But yeah, so that's basically there as a minimum to make sure that you've got the minimum sort of income to meet your basic needs.
So that's 10,000 a year you'd get back.
Yes.
And one of my next questions, I think, is something I always think about, which I never really quite clicks with me with pensions, is, say for example you've got a whole figure of, a lot of people to me mention £1 million pension, right? And that must be some sort of amazing target, because I have no idea what a decent pension is or what a normal pension would be. Say that's like £1 million, right, and that's in your pension. What does that give you every year, and do you just eat away at that £1 million until you die, or does it run out, or does it accumulate interest? What happens?
Yes, so basically the £1 million sort of goal has been brought in because of lifetime allowances, effectively. So again, we'll use £1 million as an example. So you've got £1 million pension pot. Effectively, when you get a retirement age or when you can take your pension, you then have choices on what you do with that money. And that's effectively where I come in and can help you. So to answer a few of your questions there, yes, you can take money out and sort of live and use it that way and drip feed money out on an as and when basis. You can deplete that pot. So if you have a very lavish lifestyle, then yes, you could deplete that very quickly. But equally, £1 million, you would reasonably expect that would last a lifetime. Right? Okay. What our job is to help with is to basically give you a safe withdrawal limit to make sure that whatever pension pot you have lasts your lifetime. Now, we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know, unfortunately, when people are going to die, so we have to use sort of best guesses. But that's what our job is, to make sure that those funds last as long as you want them to. But yes, you can deplete, it can go down to zero if you live outside the means that the pension provides. But that's what we help, we kind of model, we cash model to make sure that given your parameters and given the lifestyle you want to live, we can model how long that will last.
And so does that whole figure, is it because it's in a pension, is that accumulating in interest rate over time?
Yes,
well?
so part of our role is your sort of wealth of financial advisors is while our pension's invested, it will hopefully then still be generating you an income. So as you're taking money out, we're putting money back in through interest and through growth through our investments. So you can get in a situation where you might never deplete the funds because it's going up more than you're taking out, or you're taking just as much as going in. And again, we can advise on that. We can help kind of cash model that.
Yeah. Okay, so you can almost grow the pension, and then obviously when it gets to that age where the inevitable happens and you pass away, then that can be transferred into whatever channel that you've maybe put in your will, or maybe what.
Yes. So again, some of the benefits and some of the change that's happened in the government over the last few years is they've made it much more generational now. So you can pass your pension down the generations, much more tax efficient than you could before. So it's outside of your estate, so it doesn't sit inside your estate for inheritance tax.
Okay.
So it's a completely separate pot. And again, depending on the age that you do die, you could pass your money down completely tax-free to a spouse or to kids.
Right. Okay.
So it's a brilliant vehicle now.
Yeah. So pensions are really sort of, like, say, a tax-efficient way.
Yes.
I know a lot of people who are worried about what will happen to my parents' money or whatever when they pass away. That I just lose, like, what is it, 40% or something like that of it?
Yeah.
So, I hate to think that if they had, I don't think they do have this. My parents particularly had a £1 million pension, but 400,000 of that going to is it the state or?
So there's a couple of things. Yeah, there's a couple of things sort of within that. So inheritance tax is basically anything that's inside your estate. So not your pension, but anything that's inside your estate over a certain threshold attracts inheritance tax, which is 40%. Yeah. So there are things you can do to help mitigate that across your lifetime, and again, that's some of the things that we can help with. Your pension doesn't fall into your estate, so it doesn't attract inheritance tax, and that's one of the benefits. What a lot of people have previously kind of experienced, and where losing your pension pot sort of comes from, is an older style pension, which is actually coming a little bit more back into fashion, which is an annuity. Right. So again, I don't want to get too technical today, but basically an annuity is where you cash a proportion of all of your pension in, and you get a guaranteed income from an insurance company. Right. So you might cash your £1 million in and get £50,000 a year for your entire life. Right. But on death, that income's
theirs.
Yes. Right. So if you die in year one, it's not a great proposition. If you live for 30 years, it might be really good. Okay, so that's where people losing their pension pot sort of comes from a little bit. Obviously you hear things in the news. But again, if you have any concerns, just speak to somebody.
Do you think that maybe that is coming back in now because of the way that the world's going in terms of everything getting so expensive? Or?
There's a number of reasons why annuities are coming back in. So for a lot of years, the annuity rates, so the rate that you get paid for each pound in your pension pot hasn't been great, and it's getting better due to sort of external market factors. Yeah. So you're getting more bang for your buck now than you were a few years ago, which is why it's coming back into fashion. But again, I suppose a lot of people do like that guaranteed income. They know that they're going to get £10,000 a year from the state or whatever. Yeah. So it's easier to budget, it's easier to plan your life if you know you're going to get X pounds on X days, rather than a bit more of an ad hoc system.
Okay. Well, yeah, so that makes more sense. All right, that brings me to another question then. So financial services and financial advice over the years has been linked with a lot of scams, and there's loads out there, we all know it. People tell me I'm making loads of money, just give us this amount, and then and then I'll see you in Florida maybe. What are the sort of number one ways to sort of spot those traps?
Yeah, it's a question we get asked quite a lot, and we do help some of our clients. Some of our clients ring us and say, I've seen X, Y, or Z. Basically, scammers are very, very good at what they do. They build a career around taking money off the vulnerable, or not even the vulnerable, off anybody. Basically, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. One of the things I often say to clients is if you can find a similar deal, or if you can find something like it in the marketplace, then it might not be a scam. But if it's sort of a bit of a unicorn and it stands alone and you can't find anything similar to it, probably it's a scam. Don't get your financial advice, or don't take financial advice from TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or Jimmy down the pub. What I would say is use reputable brands, so your high street banks. Again, going back to what I said about St James's Place, they're a FTSE 100 company, and I know that gives me a lot of credibility to talk to clients because they can Google us and we're there. Yeah. Google's your friend. Make sure you've done some research before you make any commitments. And it's just that general rule of thumb. If it feels wrong in your gut, it probably is. Speak to somebody, speak to your bank, speak to a financial advisor. There's no hard and fast rule. People are very clever now on how they do it and how they target you and through phishing and vishing and cold calling and all kinds of things now. So just be vigilant. Take that extra step if you are going to commit any money. Never open links on emails. Sort of things you'll have heard across your lifetime.
I suppose there's always that what you mentioned earlier on about before you hand out any advice, there's always that free initial talk that you can have with yourselves that people can say and they can bring out and they can mention it and say, look, this is what I've seen, this is what I've been borderline promised. What's the chances of it actually coming off? And then you can kind of give them the kind of reality of that, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we get often clients will ring us and say, does this sound like a good deal? And you go, well, let's take a step back, let's assess the situation. And sometimes it's just that soundboard, and when they tell you, they almost tell themselves. So even if you're not talking to a financial advisor, just tell a family member, tell someone else that what you've seen, and sometimes that can put the brakes on. So just be vigilant.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about the different types of pensions. So you've got obviously private pension, state pension. Were there any others?
So again, depending if you're employed or self-employed, you might have private pensions, but most people have state pension entitlement and sort of workplace pensions. So if you've had, this is a question from someone in the audience previously, if you've had multiple jobs and they've been at multiple different companies and those companies have contributed to a pension but only within their sort of trusted provider, I suppose, somebody legal in general, etc. Can you take all of those pensions and put them in one place? So the easy answer to that is yes, you can. The more complicated answer is we have to do a lot of due diligence to make that a reality. Okay, so part of what we do and part of a consolidation, any consolidation pension expert will do is basically check to see if it's the right thing for the client. Depending on potential guarantees within all pensions, depending on sort of costs and charges, performance. We do a lot of due diligence, we do a lot of work to make sure it's the right thing for the client to consolidate a pension. A lot of what we do for our existing clients is to do that. So we just sweep up behind them for their entire life. Okay, so as and when they change jobs, we will sweep up a pension and bring it to us. Now there are several advantages of that. First one is admin, so you're not getting multiple pension statements every year. I suppose the biggest one is that the pension pots don't get forgotten about or lost. Because if you're in your 30s now and you've got 2 or 3 pension pots or 4 pension pots or 5, fast forward down another 20, 30 years, how many pension pots will you have? Will you keep track of where they are? Do you have the relevant paperwork to access them? And then the admin side, do you know how they're invested? Do you know what their performance is like? Do you know what the costs and charges are? So that's part of what we do in our advice is we will tell you, this is what you get charged, this is how they're performing. Do you want to move them to us? The advice is that we can. Do you want to proceed? And then going through that life, they'll have their active pension with their employer, a pension with ourselves or another provider that's managed by ourselves. So for me, it's better for the client because then I have an instant snapshot view of basically their entire wealth. So then that gives me more scope to give better financial advice because I can see everything that's on the playing board. And that's it really. So it's not right for every client. Some ones we can't move because of old guarantees or benefits, and we will tell that to the client. But yes, so we can do it ultimately.
So I've heard a few things over sort of my time, and this particularly came from the golf club that I was playing at because there's a lot of old men. And a few of them had retired on a full salary pension. What does that mean? So
they're older style pensions, and you don't tend to find as many of those now. You still tend to find them in sort of government jobs, so teachers, firefighters, policemen. So basically, how that works is, and again, there are different variations within the defined benefit pension world, where you get a defined benefit when you come out of your role, when you retire. So that can be based on a few things, so years of service, average salary over that service, your final salary, which is what historically got called. And basically, given your years of service plus your salary, you will get a defined amount of money every year for life. Okay. Now, you don't tend to find these very often anymore in sort of the private sector because they're very expensive to maintain and run for the employer. Yeah. But certainly the government have held on to them, and teachers, let's say firefighters, policemen, tend still to have them. Our default advice for those sort of pensions is leave them where they are because they're sort of, you've got a guaranteed income in retirement. But again, there are situations and scenarios where we can move them to ourselves, and there's reasons why we would do that, which I'll not go into today because, again, probably beyond the scope of today's meeting. But just if you have one of those, it's still worthwhile speaking to someone about it because they may tell you what you've got to golden goose and don't move it.
Don't move it. Yeah, so you could be obviously some of these people maybe 80 grand a year and that's what they're getting as a final salary.
Yeah, absolutely. Or a proportion of that.
Yeah, a proportion of that, amazing. So this is probably quite a common question for quite a lot of our audience because they might not have been at a job for very long. I know we talked about consolidating pensions, but if you were there for under a year and the company had contributed for under a year and you contributed for under a year, what would you say is probably, based on sort of an average salary of maybe 25 grand a year, you might be putting in only a small percentage of that is going in each month. Is it worth keeping that in that pot, or is it worth just kind of taking it out if you need it? Particularly given sort of this economy right now.
So with regards to removing your pensions or taking your pension out, you have to be of pensionable age to actually activate your pensions. So again, that's 55 today. That is increasing to 57. So if you're under 57, you can't access your pension. What you can do is consolidate it, so you can move it, or you can move it into your current provider. So whoever, Aviva or Legal in General, you can see if they'll take a transfer in and just move it into to that one. So you'll always have that pension, but as we've mentioned before, administrative burden on yourself and keeping track of it and what you do with it. If you do that every year for your entire career, you'll have a lot of pensions. But it still remain. If you did nothing with it, it will still remain invested. It will still be generating you growth. But again, if it's a tiny pot, it might just be sort of more admin than it's worth. But what you can do is either consolidate as part of a larger planning element, or you can move it to your current employee scheme if they accept transfers.
So this question is more to do with the current economy because obviously interest rates are climbing and that. So I know this kind of bridges on that borderline of we're talking probably more about interest here than we are about pensions, but it's still relevant. So interest rates are going up. It's costing people more and more money to buy stuff basically, or take loans, credit cards, etc. That's having a burden. But if you have a pension, is that pension, wherever it's invested, benefiting from a higher interest rate, or is it not benefiting from the higher interest rates?
So again, more of a complex question than it probably sounds. So when your pension is invested, it's normally invested in four or more asset classes. So the reason it's 4 more asset classes is to give you diversification, but also for different market conditions, different asset classes will perform differently. Okay, so some is cash, some is bonds, equities, and property, and there are other ones on the outside that don't kind of make up the main part of your pension. So interest rates, you will benefit from higher interest rates on things like cash. That can have a negative impact on other asset classes. So basically, they do an amalgamation of all 4, depending on your risk appetite to risk, and that will then have an output on your pension growth. Okay, so the point of it is you shouldn't really worry too much about the interest rates because most of your growth will come from equities, which are kind of small shareholdings in a company. So as that company grows, your sort of pension pot grows. Okay, so interest rates in the general sense, so outside of pensions, are basically the cost of borrowing or the rate that you get paid to have money in a bank. Okay, now interest rates are driven by the Bank of England base rate. Okay, and it's probably worthwhile explaining what the Bank of England does. So their job is basically to help monitor and keep inflation to around 2%, which if anyone's watched the news over the last 12 months will know it hasn't been there. it's been a lot higher. So their job is to try and get the inflation rate back down to 2%, or to help do that. And the only real tool they have in their bag is to raise interest rates. So the Bank of England base rate has steadily been increasing over the last sort of 18 months. So what that does to the average person on the street is that the cost of borrowing goes up. So mortgages go up, loans go up, credit cards go up.
Yeah.
So what that does is it means that you or the average person has less money, less disposable income in their pocket to go out and spend on goods and services. Okay. So inflation is a measure of the increase of goods and services. So if you've got less money to spend on that, there's less demand in the market for those goods and services, which should help keep prices down or even reduce prices. So that's why they're doing what they're doing, increasing interest rates, because ultimately that will then cause inflation to stop growing as much and get it back to that 2% target. So it's a short-term fix to a bigger problem.
Okay.
That's why it's happening.
Right. So, yeah. And so in a whole then, it kind of, there's only one of those assets that might actually grow and then some might actually be impacted by
it will have an impact on all of them.
Right.
To some degree. And again, we could do a whole kind of podcast on that. But for the general listener, it does have an impact. It has more of an impact on sort of money outside of your pension and your general day-to-day saving and spending. So I wouldn't get too worried about interest rates in your pension. That's the job of your investment manager. So whether it's myself or Viva or Legal in General, that's their job to worry about. So I wouldn't get too pet about it.
Okay. So don't worry if interest rates are going up.
For your pension.
For your pension, it's okay.
It's more the inflation rate that affects your pension. Because obviously you're putting in money today. As inflation goes up, the buying power of that money today goes down. So the job of a pension really is to keep pace with inflation, more than interest. So it's more to keep pace with inflation or to outstrip inflation. So at a time in the future when you retire in 20, 30 years or 10 years or 5 years, the money still has the same buying power as it did today. So the cost of a car, the cost of a loaf of bread, a pint of milk will have gone up. Your pension will have gone up to match that.
So say for example inflation maybe goes up by, for example, 5%, you want to be making sure that pension's growing at 5, or even 6, 7, 8%.
Yeah, so the buying power remains the same year on year.
So that's cool. Okay. So when it comes to pensions, we know that a pension, like you mentioned in the last question there's different asset pots. Where does that go, and can I have a say in where that goes as it's invested?
Yes. So the earlier you contribute to a pension, the more beneficial it would be for you in the long run, because of something called compound interest or compound growth. So your growth and interest gets more interest and growth, and it kind of snowballs like that. Most people will not know what's happening with their pension. I'd say 95% of people don't really know what's happening with their pension or where it's invested or what's going on with it. Their company will set up a pension pot, they'll pay into it, and that's sort of the end of the story for that individual. So they will be then in a default fund that's selected not by them on behalf of Viva or Legal in General or St James's Place, and they don't know what's happening with it. Okay, so what you can do is self-select. So you can go into your online portal through Viva, and you'll give you options on how to invest your money. Okay, and what they'll normally have is sort of a select few funds that they've put together that you don't really know what's going on with it, but there's a few options, different risk categories. That's probably the state of play for most people. They don't really know what's happening with their pensions. They don't know what their growth side, they don't know what return they're getting, they don't know the cost. Again, the part of financial advisors is if we would consolidate our money and move it to us, we would have a conversation about how those funds are invested, where they're invested, their attitude to risk, how much risk they're willing to tolerate, what sort of returns they're looking for, and we can help put together a plan that gets them to where they're going. Importantly, and again, some plans have this built in, but what we do is as a client gets closer to retirement, obviously their need to retain that capital gets greater because they're going to require it one day. So we start and de-risk their portfolio. So we start and take some of the risk out of their investments to make sure that capital is preserved. So when they get to a day in the future that they want that money, it's still there for them.
So it's kind of growing at a high rate, but then you kind of slow it down slightly to kind of make it sure it's less risk. Yeah,
absolutely. So again, that's part of the advice and that we do on an annual basis. And we sit down with clients as we go through this journey and Some people never retire.
Yeah.
You'd be one of those people, Harry, I think.
Probably,
You work
yeah.
forever. But some people never retire because they like working and build a business, or they just enjoy work, or they kind of go into a part-time role. And they never really need to access their pension.
Yeah.
So again, you can have a different attitude. Some people want to access it as early as possible, and that's fine as well. And again, we build that into our advice structure.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a part of it where, say for example, the client had very, very strong sort of ethical views about where money's invested? Is that something that is taken into consideration with their pension?
Yeah, so again, we take all of that into consideration with our pensions. So we do have ethical only funds that the clients can invest into. So if they're really partial on that, we can tailor our investment around that. We have no exposure to things like Russia at the moment, just because obviously of what's going on. So that is something that's on our mind. Is now we build into our consideration, and again we take that consideration into the client's overall portfolio as well.
Yeah, very good. The last thing I'd want to really think is that my money's been invested in like weapons or something like that, because I know that's happened in the past, hasn't it?
Yes.
So here's another question from someone in our audience. I'm due to inherit a large sum of money from a family member. I'm quite young, so if I put it into my pension straight away, is that a good idea, or will I still need to pay inheritance tax?
So again, quite a few things to unpack here. A lot of what we do for clients is, as I said, making sure that generational money goes down the order that, first of all, that they want, in a tax efficient manner as possible, and effectively ease of that transaction as well. So, if a client is receiving money, again, I don't really want to get too involved in the advice side of this, but if someone's receiving money from an estate, it will already have received or already paid inheritance tax, if it's over the nil rate band.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that client's receiving that money, then they're free to do with that money as they want, because the tax has already been paid on it. Yeah. So they do have an option to pay into their pension, but again, there are annual sort of subscription limits that they can put into their pension. So again, speak to somebody before they do anything. Yeah. Consideration is age, so if you can't access it with sort of 20, 30, 40 years, then is it the right thing for you at the right time? Or there are other things you could do with it. Yeah. So again, pensions are one arm of what we do, but there are other tax efficient vehicles that we have for clients with sort of larger lump sums of money that we can have a conversation around.
So if you get a large sum of money, it doesn't have to go into your pension, it could go into an investment, or it could go into a better sort of vehicle, like you say, that might suit you better down the line.
Yeah, and it might even be a blended approach, so it's not a one size fits all. It's not that you have to do all pensions or all investments. We can do a blended approach, but again, for that particular scenario, that's probably worth that client or that individual reaching out, because there are several things that we could do. It's probably too much to explain in a sort of 30-second slot, but that's a lot of what we do and a lot of what we can help with.
Yeah. Another question then is tax efficiency in pensions. Yeah. Tell me more.
So, as I said right at the start, pension is one of the most tax efficient vehicles that you can use for your retirement. Yeah. So, you get multiple tax benefits from using a pension. Okay, so the most obvious one is when you pay by your employer or privately, you get tax relief provided through the government. So again, depending on how you do your self-assessment, whether it's PAYE, which the majority of your listeners today will be PAYE, most employees pay what's called net pay, which means that your gross pension contributions go into your pension. Right? So that means you pay no insurance, no income tax, and no national insurance on those contributions. So you get relief on the way. Right. When it's inside your pension, you also get tax benefits, so you pay no capital gains, which you mentioned, and it's outside of your estate for inheritance tax. Yeah. So 2 more benefits. On the way out, you also then get a 25% lump sum, which you can take completely tax-free. Yeah. And then the rest of your pension, which is left, you can then decide how and when you take that in the most tax-efficient manner. So there are multiple tax benefits built into a pension that make it a really worthwhile investment vehicle for that retirement phase. Yeah. Again, for your self-employed listeners, there are other benefits, corporation tax relief, and income tax relief as well. But yeah, they're a very, very effective and efficient tax vehicle.
Yeah, awesome. I've got one more question as well. Is we talk about age of like getting into a pension, and obviously because we all know when we get out of a pension, don't we? So it's kind of like that retirement age.
Yes.
But getting into a pension, what is number one? I suppose the best time to get into a pension, start contributing, and kind of what might that cost the young person, if that, I assume they'll be young, and if they get to a point in life where an older person who maybe doesn't have a pension, what's kind of the kind of last stage that you can really get in, and what's reasonable and what's not?
Yeah, good question. Quite a lot of unpack. So the ideal age to get into a pension is as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So my son is 11 months old and he's already got a pension set up.
Wow, must be working really hard.
So he's got a pension set up, which me and his mother pay into.
Yeah.
So he will have, again, a longer period for that compound growth, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So the earlier you get in, the more you've got to grow, and the less you have to do at the back end.
Yeah.
So you might hear people in their 40s or 50s starting to panic and go, I haven't really put nothing in my pension. Then they're starting to talk about higher amounts, 15, 20, 25% of their salary, then they're putting into their pension.
Yeah.
If you start that journey earlier, there's a less burden at the back end.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have to balance that with life and disposable income and seeing friends and going out and paying mortgages and general life. Basically, the more you can put in an early age, the better you will be in the longer run. Okay. The second part of that question was
what's the kind of that latest age that you can kind of contribute to that pension?
So basically, if you're working, it's your working age really. If you're working, you can contribute to a pension. Now again, there are rules and caveats around that towards the sort of top end, so 68, 75. But basically, if you're working, you can contribute. So again, why would you do that if you're at that sort of age? Well, the money in your pension can pass down the generations if you don't need it. So it's always worth considering. It's always worth asking somebody, your HR representative or a financial advisor. But yeah, there's no minimum age, and there is a maximum age, but for most people that won't be a consideration either.
Right. Okay. So another question that I thought of earlier on was when we were talking about inheriting money, what to do with it afterwards, and all that sort of stuff. And most inheritance is part of an estate.
Yeah.
As someone who maybe is almost expecting to kind of die, and they haven't had a financial advisor, they've just kind of stuck their roots, but they've had a good job, they've amassed a pot of money that's going to go, it's in their estate, it's going to go and move down to, well, it's going to get inheritance tax, isn't it, first, and then it's going to move to whoever is delegated. Before they pass, is there a point at which someone like yourself can say, look, this is going to happen to your money, and you're going to lose maybe the 40% or whatever inheritance tax rate is. Let's move this pot of money into a pension, and then can that then be passed down outside the estate? So
there are windows that we work inside, and a lot of people know about the 7-year window for inheritance tax, so gifting money away. So again, without getting too technical, and probably not the right moment to talk about this in too much detail, but yes, there are things we can do. It all comes down to timeline and quality of health and sort of life expectancy. But if you're in that way of thinking where you're going to have large sums of money, or you've got a large estate, whether that be property or cash or a combination, then it's certainly worth a conversation, because there are things that can be done, certainly not right until the end, but certainly within the time frame before a person's expected to pass, that can be done. So it's always worth having a conversation, as we've said several times on this today. We don't charge a fee, so if there's nothing we can do, we will tell you that. Unfortunately, you might have left it a little bit too late, but it's worth finding out, because 40% of the money you spend your entire life accumulating stings. And we've had situations where clients have come to us too late, or we've spoken them down the line and they never received financial advice, or they've dealt with parents or grandparents' estates, and it does hurt. And obviously, you work down hard for your money, and you want to make sure that goes to the people you want it to. So, it's always worth a conversation. If we can't help you to tell you, and at least you know, and it puts your mind to rest, or the family's mind to rest, that there's nothing that could be done. But equally, if there are things we can do, then it could save the family or yourself a lot of money.
So that's one end of the spectrum. You've got, that's no big deal. I know I've talked already about the £1 million pension and the big kind of pot of money that someone might pass down. That's just kind of one end, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got the other end with people who just don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, in this country at the moment, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people are really struggling. What would your sort of tips be to them to start accumulating to start to be able to put into a pension? What would you say would be maybe a minimum contribution, or what can they expect?
So there's no minimum contribution because it's whatever you can afford. Right. Now, as I said, through your employer, you will be paying a minimum of 5% and they'll pay 3%. So you're contributing 8% of your salary, again, as long as you met certain criteria within the employer to pay into a pension. That might not be enough to fund the lifestyle you want in retirement, and you might need to contribute extra. But again, it comes down to circumstance. So I suppose this comes down to less financial advice and more just financial prudence and how you can manage your money better on a day-to-day basis. And again, it's a little bit of common sense. It's kind of write a budget, understand what your incomings are, understand what your outgoings are. Are there things you could change? Are there things you could flex? Could you reduce your Sky package? Could you have a different type of insurance product? Could you have a different type of mortgage? Is a big one. So it's understanding your budget, understanding what's costing you money, and can you do the things around that. Energy at the minute's obviously going through the roof. And that's a large bill that people weren't paying this time last year, or just starting to pay it. Are there now energy providers that are offering better tariffs that you can go on to and free up some flex in the budget? And if you are living within your means, then you're doing the right thing. If you have disposable income, then it's a conversation to be had about what you do with it. But it all just comes down to financial prudence, really. Are you paying debt? If the debt's on good rates, so you're on 0% for credit cards, so if you've got the best loan rate, your mortgages. So it's always worth a conversation, even if you think, oh, financial advice isn't for me. Again, I'll never turn anyone away. I'll always have a conversation with somebody. Before my life as a financial advisor, I worked in the bank for a lot of years, and this is a lot of what we do, which is financial education, and that's the starting point for obviously financial freedom. You've got to start with a budget. You've got to know your incomes. You've got to know your outgoings, and from that point, sort of the world's your oyster. Because if you live in a blind way that you don't know what your incomes are, it will eventually lead to financial problems. Yeah,
and so if you do maybe come down the line of you start being able to commit to an amount, that's not fixed, is it? So you can kind of, if you get to maybe a bump in the road, look, I need to change my amount, can I change it? And just give yourself a call, or even is it with, because I know that's talking about private pension contribution, isn't it, when it's talking about calling yourself. When it comes to the employer, you kind of, you have that choice, don't you, of how much percent you can.
Normally, again, for the employees I've worked with in my past and the clients I've worked with who are contributing, you normally get windows where you can flex your pensions up and down. So, again, my previous life was at Barclays, and I know that you could change it in any given month, and it would change month to month. Right. So you're not tied in. And again, with if you are struggling, things like mortgage companies now, they've got a directive where they've got to be seen to be helping clients. Mm-hmm. So whether that's putting a mortgage onto interest only for a period of time, giving them holiday payments, there are things that can be done. So if you're struggling, again, have a conversation with somebody, whether it's your bank manager, or it's myself. I said, well, I'm happy to have that conversation as well. But it's just understanding your options. That's the main thing. Right. I think a lot of time people lie in bed at night and worry about these things because they don't know, they haven't took that first step. They don't know what their options are. I suppose once you know your options, you might have done everything you can, and I know that gives you peace of mind. Yeah. But again, part of what we do is we can see further down the road than most people, because we understand the ramifications of different life choices today. I suppose it's just kind of telling people, well, if you do X today, it will affect Y down the road.
Yeah. So what we can conclude from today in this fantastically informative podcast is that financial advice is very safe if you do it with the right people. And it can be very cost effective from a tax standpoint, both as an employee and as an employer. We've talked a little bit more about the inheritance side of things and how we kind of pass the money down and where it comes from, etc. What might be the best way of contributing to your pension. And hopefully, as a listener, you've learned a little bit more about pension. And if you do want to discuss or have a free chat, by all means, have a chat to Steve. And I'll pop his links and stuff below. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks very much, Harry. It's been very enjoyable. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. And sure to click the subscribe and like button and leave a comment if you would like to see any more content from us on Teesside Health Co. Thanks.